Working. Welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us here at the GL Events stage. I hope you've all had a wonderful day so far here at Event Sustainability Live. We have got a very tasty lunchtime treat for you here, courtesy of the wonderful Lime Venue portfolios and their brilliant team of chefs. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Jenna Carter here, the Head of Marketing at Lime Venue Portfolio, to feed your souls with some beautiful information about sustainable food.
Thank you, Ben. You're making me hungry. I haven't had lunch yet. But thank you ever so much for coming along to this session. It is very much going to be a conversation around sustainable versus tasty. I'm delighted to have two chefs to take part in that conversation, and I'll intro those guys in a moment. Just to recap about Lime Venue Portfolio, so we've pulled several sessions together today in conjunction with Event Sustainability Live, as we've been, I suppose, a cheerleader for better events probably over the last 5 to 10 years now, in particular with the food side of things. Lime Venue Portfolio are catered for by Compass Group, so we're part of Global Cater Compass Group. They have quite an ambitious plan to be net zero by 2030, so food really is at the heart of everything that we do. We've launched various different campaigns that you might have seen to do with the topic of food and events. We launched our #FORRO campaign about 5 years ago, which is all to do with the fear of running out, and I'm sure we'll touch on that as we go through the session. We've also looked at the events through the prism of food, so we created several award-winning reports on that particular subject. We've created our Meetings for Change package, which is all about making sure that customers can buy more sustainable. And more recently, we launched our Meetings of the Future campaign, which is all around what meeting of the future might look like, as you'd expect, but in particular, very much focusing on the food aspect of things. So all of that material is available on our website for you to take a look at any time. But without further ado, I want to introduce our guest panelists today. So we have Sam Morgan from the Venues Collection. Sam has recently completed a Marcus Waring apprenticeship program, very much focusing on seasonality and sustainability. Sam also is really leading the way at the Venues Collection when it comes to circular kitchens and bringing sustainability to the forefront through food. And Fern, I'd like to welcome to the stage. Fern is from Harlequins. Fern has been with the business for quite some time and is part of the wider catering element when it comes to Compass Group. So thank you both for joining us today. So let's get started. Let me get some questions over to you. So Fern, can I start with you if that's okay? So we're obviously talking about tasty versus sustainable here, and I really want to kind of get a benchmark or perhaps set some expectations around what people are actually asking for. So A, can I ask you how many of your customers do actually want to sit down with you and talk about the menu, talk about food? And B, how prominent is the sustainability conversation that you're having with them, if at all?
I think mainly for us. I don't think it's working that one. There we are. I think mainly for us, because if you're not familiar with rugby, the demographic is very much older, mostly male, kind of fairly well-off blokes when it comes to hospitality. So it varies very much from match day clients to C&E. C&E are very much more into, because they're larger companies, they want to know where stuff comes from, because they need to feed that back down to their bosses and stuff. Where match day, it's very much a value for money, like as in it's that perceived thing, like I want my beef this and this because I've paid X amount to be in hospitality. So with the C&E we're much more vocal about it, but with the match day they don't really want to talk to us about the sustainability of the aspect. They just want it there on their plate, on time, hot. That is pretty much how it goes. So when it comes with for them, we very much package it in a do less and say more. Say more, do less. There we go. Oh, God, I did it again. Sorry. Anyway, so we try and do a lot of things, like we use only plant-based cream, plant butter, all these sort of things. in the food, and we don't. If we went and told them, they'd be like, "Oh, well, you're forcing me to eat plant butter and all this sort of stuff." So we very much put all that into the food and try and gear menus around without them really noticing, which I know sounds a bit sneaky, but that's the best way of doing it for us for match day clients.
And why do you have to go under the radar?
It's because as soon as you say something is plant-based or vegan, people seem to switch in their mind like it's a political statement. And they're like, you're not forcing me not to have my beef, that kind of thing. That's their whole kind of attitude towards it. So it's very much a do non-meat starters, and they won't really realise. It's just that sort of, you have to go under the radar with that certain demographic so you don't have a massive backlash and have to backtrack yourself. You have to keep like edging forward. 'Cause if you go too, full in their face, you'll be back like 10 paces.
Sam, could you elaborate on that? How are you seeing that happening at the venues collection?
I think, is that working? I think with the venues collection, to Fern's point, we've done it. We haven't asked permission to do it, and people have sort of come on a journey, and we've moved step by step. We haven't tried to jump in with both feet. There are areas of our menus now where sourcing is the utmost importance, making sure that we're using seasonal produce. So that's bedding down as staples within our business. But then calling out, I suppose, the dessert side of things with the plant base. We migrated onto a plant-based dessert menu on our a la carte offer from October of this year. I haven't heard any negative feedback. We haven't marketed the fact that we are plant-based in that space. For a customer's perspective, I suppose if they wanted to look at it, there's less allergens in it, which means it caters to more people, and that would be the only way for me as a chef that they would notice. I'm very much about the taste, and I know that we can't. Well, apparently we can't have both, but we can have both.
No, it's sustainable or tasty, one or the other.
We can have both. We'll set that precedent straight away. For me, if you put it on the menu, it has to taste good. Fundamentally, the sustainable policies that come in behind it are coming more to the front. But that's our jobs as chefs, is to take care of that and making sure that the tasty plate of food that every customer has in front of them is exactly as they expect it to be.
And how have your... Sorry, Fern, did you want to say something?
One thing I want to touch on, you said about provenance and seasonality. When it comes to our match day menus, we find it very much easier because those things a lot of the time coincide with sustainability. We wrap the kind of sustainability in that provenance package. As in, they are very excited to hear where that comes from, this comes from, and that value for money thing goes back in their head of like, well, this must cost a lot because I know where the farm is. That seems to go down easy with them, so we kind of wrap it up in that package for them, and that's how we kind of put it into our menus without them thinking we're forcing something upon them, kind of thing.
But it's different, is it, for a conference or events booker? They're more interested in knowing exactly where things have come from, the carbon labelling, for example, that they show more of a keener interest, is that right?
The C&E, well, the conference and events, because they are usually conference companies like Sky or something like that, they have their own targets they have to hit. So then they can't just go to their conferences and then have loads of unsustainable food, because they try and emulate it as well.
Yeah, they all have their own net zero promises, don't they? Yeah. Okay.
So they're a lot more open to it, and they try and kind of balance their menus out a bit and then have more of a conversation with us. Where it's completely flipped with the match day, if I'm honest.
And I'm interested to kind of get your perspective from your chefs brigades, teams, however you call them, what you call them these days. But how are they finding, how are they reacting to having to be more sustainable with the menus that you're creating? Sam, do you want to pick that?
Yeah, I think I'd split it in two. From my age demographic or head chef's demographic, you're re-educating classical way of thinking and how they've always cooked. So I think that is the first challenge. We have to bring them on that journey, and like I said before, it is a step-by-step journey, and you're mapping out how we're going to get there. The real positive that I look at is the young guys in the brigade that come into the kitchens is, they might have been with us for 2 years where we've been on this journey already. They don't know any different. So what, for me in the next couple of years when the brigade progresses and those guys come through the ranks and they become sous chefs and head chefs and really have an influence on menu packages and engaging with delegates, that's where I see that we've started the process, we've bedded the processes down, and we've done a lot of the foundation work. The innovation I see comes from the younger or the more junior members of staff within the brigade, and it's about enhancing them, pushing them, questioning why they think such ways, what they can do with products that we might not think of. So that's, you know, a positive on both sides, slightly more challenging from the senior ranks, but again, it's about going through the process, mapping out exactly why and showing the benefits and the measurements alongside it.
Yeah, it's about getting people to think differently, I suppose, isn't it? Which is always a challenge. Okay, Sam, I want to ask you another question, which you've already answered, but it's around sustainable or tasty. I know you're saying you want both. Let's put both aside for now. If you could only have one, what kind of would you prefer to go with? Could you perhaps talk around a little bit about some of the latest dishes or ingredients that you've used, or where you might have had to compromise?
It's a tough one. You do have to compromise in some areas, and it may be cost is a good example. Is with the procurement side of things, we're not where we need to be, and it needs to, more people need to move into that space to drive efficiencies in price to then help that with, I suppose, ultimately the delegates' price they pay, but also the management of the kitchen finance. Taste is always at the forefront of what I do.
Has sustainability made it harder, though?
I wouldn't say it's made it harder. I think it makes you think about the full circle of a product, for example. I know that on our session earlier we called out an ingredient for Christmas that we all peel our carrots and our parsnips, for example, for our Christmas dinners. I've pushed my guys this year to cut down on their waste, be slightly more sustainable as a result, and not peel the parsnips and the carrots that the customer's probably not going to notice. And if they do notice, then we've got a nice story behind it. We've saved a little bit of labour in the background, but also we've enhanced the taste. So I think one does feed the other, and it's about not getting to the place where we're force-feeding sustainability and it's not tasty. We have to go through the motions and make sure we're in the right position to do it when we're ready to do it.
Okay. And Fern, what about you? How difficult do you find balancing the two?
I think for us, it's hard to get the teams on board sometimes, because if you have a lot of the older generations of chefs that were there when you know everything was done very much old style, and as soon as you say, oh, you can only use this plant cream and plant butter, they go like, oh, we're pandering to a minority, and they get all a bit fussy. But then I have to kind of explain to them that this stuff needs to be developed, because I used to be a pastry chef for years, so my mental thing of like, oh, but it's not the same as cream, it's not the same as butter, eggs. But if you don't put the time in to develop these things, then they're always going to be at the same level. I was just basically say to them, like, we have to push through with these things, because soon it won't be a choice, for one, and two, like, it's never going to get better without endorsement. So I basically have to say to them to carry on just basically experimenting with it, and don't be so rigid, if that makes any sense. And that seems to have been quite positive from now on.
Good. And Sam, we were talking before about the sticky toffee that you serve at the Venues Collection. Could you elaborate a bit more on that?
So our a la carte restaurant, actually, to be fair, on any package, whether it be a banquet, a wedding, sticky toffee pudding is an absolute winner.
It's my fave. I
can't take it off the menu in July, which pains me that people want to eat really dense, I suppose, sweet, heavy pudding in July, but I'm not going to call out what people want. So in our assessment of where we could go, I challenged one dessert in particular with some of our chefs. And we started off by offering a dairy-free alternative, which was on the menu. Didn't have much take-up on it, so I decided, I suppose, not to advertise the fact that it was going to be plant-based from a certain date forward. We made the switch. It still remains our biggest seller. The chefs are all on board with it. They've learned a new way to do something. And it shows that it can be done with a favourite ingredient or a favourite staple that people associate it with. And there are little tweaks that we have to make. We do have to work it, but we don't advertise the fact. That is just the staple of what we do, and that's now finding its way as a foundation for all aspects of the kitchen. And I think, to Fern's point, it's not trying to greenwash in terms of, vegan and plant-based, but also if I look at it from a meat cookery side of things, is if we are going to buy a chicken, why can't we use the whole of the chicken? So you might only get half a breast on your main course now, but you'll get that supplemented with a secondary cut from the leg, and we'll make the sauce from the carcass and things like that. So it's about educating the guys in a world where everything can come pre-packaged, is going back to a few staples of treating your ingredients well, making sure you know where they come from and utilising that and making it go as far as you possibly can get it to go.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, I'll have sticky toffee pudding when I'm next in one of those venues, please. Fern, can I ask, could you perhaps talk us through something that you've done at Quinn's around a more sustainable menu, the ingredients that you've used?
So apart from as I mentioned before, we are very much trying to get the provenance and the seasonality. And for example, we don't have any air freight. We have no air freighted ingredients, things like berries, fruit out of season. We don't use them, which you think would be quite a pushback, but people just kind of go, if you explain they're not in season and the impact, they kind of go, oh, okay, it's fine. We also, as you said about if you do use meat, we try to put into practice, I'm trying to think of a nicer word, but carcass balancing.
What's that?
So basically, do you know if you have a chicken and then everyone wants the breast, how many chickens are you going to use? And you have all this excess meat. So unless it's a special request to the players or something, we never use breast. We always use thigh in different cuts. If we ever do use beef, which is once in a couple of months, it won't be any steaks, anything like. It'd be the lesser cuts. You have to cook longer, and we very much try to look for those parts of the animal that are less used. Because, for every steak that goes to a restaurant, where's the rest of it going? And also, if we do use things like a lamb shoulder, we'll roll it and stuff it. So, for example, the amount of meat going on the plate is lower, but the perception's a lot more. So it's just basically a lot of ways of thinking where you can impact stuff, even though it doesn't look like it.
And is this part of a circular kitchen? Could you perhaps explain a little bit more about what that is and how that works?
Yeah, so basically it's everything feeding into something else. So if we write a menu and we know there's going to be, if we did a sponge, we know there's going to be offcuts for the sponge, we'll do a trifle somewhere else. And it's basically using anything there's going to be waste, using it into something else. So you're not buying in X amount of stuff with loads of deliveries, lots of trucks. You're just trying to think ahead of how you're going to utilize everything. And also, when it comes to cooking stuff, not just going, oh, I might need like 200 chickens, I'll put them all in the oven. It's very much having that mental kind of planning to batch cook things. So if you don't need them, those things that aren't being cooked, you can then repurpose them, so they're not just going into waste.
And do you ever have any conversations with event bookers around that wastage, or the fact that actually you're not going to cook 200 chickens and they're not going to get 400 chicken breasts? Do you ever have any conversations like that?
I think sometimes we speak to them, like, sometimes we'll say to them, like, if I was you, especially around bowl food, where they immediately go, I want 6 types, 1 bowl each for every person. We say to them, you're really not going to need that much food. It's probably going to save you money to have 50% of the less, what you would maybe say a less popular option, and that will save on food waste as well. Or if they're very adamant, then we are very cautious to how much we put out and how much we prep. As in, if we need more, we'll make more. But it's I'm not going to make it for the sake of making it, because it's just going to see the bin, basically.
And we've touched on vegan or vegetarianism. I think vegan sometimes can be used as a word that perhaps gets flung around. But I think we've probably all had menus where we've had vegan options pushed on us, or even sustainable options that perhaps we didn't want and actually didn't work because they weren't as tasty as we thought they were going to be. Have you ever had any challenges around that? And if so, how have you overcome them? Sam, could I ask you?
There's always challenges. I think it's about managing the expectation. If you can make a little tweak, I suppose the easiest way to look at it is that everybody will always expect a vegetarian dish as an alternative. Does it need to be vegetarian, or can we be creators of chefs just to make that vegan? So there's no point doing a meat dish, a vegetarian alternative, and then a vegan alternative of that. So let's just look at the way we do that, engineer the menus properly to make sure that we're utilising everything we can, but also we're ticking boxes from an allergen perspective and a customer expectation in terms of how flexible we can be. And I think you very much tackle it from that way. But also with vegetarian and vegan alternatives, I find that chefs go too far the other way. So the way I like to look at it is we might have a chicken dish on the menu where it goes with a certain garnish. That certain garnish given a little bit of love and care, can actually form the basis of an amazing meal, so that the flavours, you're not being penalised by any of the flavours or the presentation. For me, there's nothing better than when you sit in a room and you might have someone that has a vegan option next to you and you might have the meat, or vice versa. Is appearance-wise, it looks exactly the same, and we're not penalising the fact that that you might be vegan or vegetarian. And looking at it from that perspective and challenge the chef's creativity when they're doing a menu, sort of menu engineering.
And Fern, have you ever had to compromise taste over sustainability? I think I know the answer, but...
Well, with us, it's more you just have to really rethink stuff. I mean, the amount of times I've had to have this conversation with, like, why can't we just have steak? And you're like... And then you have to basically just repeat yourself. And most of the time, they'll just kind of take that at face value, and then it'll be a few months later, like, oh, can we have steak on it? It is just part of parcel. I think, especially when it comes to the vegan dishes, I think you just need to not be lazy. You have to put it in, like, and I know a lot of chefs can sort of go, oh, I've done this amazing meat menu, this amazing, like, fish option, throw something out for veg. That's where it kind of is actually quite harmful. Because people go, like, as in, I don't know if you know, if you have many vegetarians in your life, but the dreaded mushroom risotto on every single menu is, I tried to put I don't actually even do that. I mean, mushroom risotto is fine, but if you have that at every single restaurant, you're going to be sick of seeing a mushroom risotto. So it's very much so, you know, put yourself in that mindset of, like, what would you, if you read it down and go, actually, I quite like that, as in, you won't go like, oh, it's not the meat option, I'm not going to have it. But it's a point where we actually get a lot of our people asking to sort of have half and half, which it looks very odd on the plate. They go like, oh, can I have the thing with all the vegetarian stuff? So, but that's a kind of a good start. They might then go like, oh, yeah, that part was the nicest part, so then they might switch next time. So it's sort of slowly with a lot of the guys we have to work with.
Well, last question before we go to questions from the floor, to both of you actually. So Sam, if I come to you first, how would you convince an audience like this, who maybe don't believe you, that sustainable is the way to go?
We need to be very conscious, not only about us, but also 10, 20 years' time. I'm fortunate enough to have children that I want them to grow up to have the same benefits that I've had. We all need to make choices in the way that we work to enable that for future generations. I think if you can hit home and strike home with something along those lines, sustainability actually becomes, the flip side is not as relevant as what it was before. And I think that, you know, people will get on board with it. But also from our side, you know, we just need to do a great job, make sure that, you know, things are tasty, we do our job properly, and ultimately when we walk out in a room full of delegates, we want smiles, we don't want complaints, and it's about bringing people on that journey, just the education piece and the engagement.
And Fern, to you, how would you convince an audience?
I think mainly for us it's that, as you said, we're going to get to a point where we don't have a choice. And I know it's very much easy to be very much like in your own head and kind of very personal, but we kind of need to think of this issue as a much wider network of, like, it's going to affect all of us if we go, yeah, don't worry, I'm not going to recycle, I'm not going to do this. But if everyone does that, then, like, what state are we going to be in? I think people need to, like, just expand their kind of horizons when it comes to food. As in, you know, you're not going to like everything. You're not going to go like, oh, this quinoa salad's the best thing ever. That might not be for you, but there will be something for you. So if you don't try anything and you just stick to the same, like, you know, meat and potatoes, that's all I will eat. Yeah, but you think if everyone does that, what the impact's going to be. So you kind of have to start at home, if that makes any sense.
It does. I think that the conversation today obviously has been around taste versus sustainability, and I didn't want you to say that you could have both, but I think the outcome is that you can. I think what also has come out of today is very much an education piece for customers. It sounds like you guys are doing so much in the kitchen, but actually it's making sure that customers at the end of the day know what you're doing and give customers that choice, because actually it will empower them to make better choices as well. Right, I'm going to go for any questions. Is there any, Ben, on Slido?
We've got lots of questions here.
Okay, great.
I'm going to come up and join you, since there's a seat free.
Take a seat.
I don't know if I'm allowed to do this. I'm going to get sacked.
We won't tell, it's okay.
Come at me, everyone. So, first question, which is quite a nice one, from one of the vegan members of the audience. Vegan does not always mean sustainable. So are there any plant-based ingredients that you avoid, and are there any instances where normal is more sustainable?
that goes back to a sourcing element. So within our business, we don't use any air freight. So and we had the sort of argument earlier, I suppose, in terms of a tomato grown in Spain and shipped in versus grown in Scotland under heat and temperature controlled areas. So it's actually more sustainable to import. Again, you know, we go through palm oil as an example that finds its way into a lot of vegan-based items. That is, again, not prevalent in a lot of the stuff that we give our delegates. So, yeah, there are things that you need to avoid, but again, it is an education piece. And I think using seasonal, the alternatives that you do use do need to have the full traction of what's available so that then we can stand by our principles, vegan or not.
I think for us, we tried to adhere to, I don't know if anyone's heard of the whole Future 50 foods list, which is crops and produce that isn't a mono as just a given because of the lesser impact than, you know, the very much kind of staple, you know, I'll have like, where wild rice would be a bit more sustainable than white rice, we'll try and basically put that into some of the dishes. And when we go through menus, we actually look down that Future 50s food list and go where can we put those swaps in where it won't be really noticed, but the impacts like are massively different. So that's where it comes to the sort of sustainability, vegan, and it all kind of ties in together. We're not just going to go because it's vegan, it's right kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's going to bring me on to one of the more quirky questions I've seen today, actually. Speaking of ingredients, actually. So are you finding there is an increase in more quirky, sustainable ingredients making their way into mainstream catering, e.g. crickets?
Oh, well, you haven't got crickets on our menu. I'm going to say that. To be honest, I've heard more about this because it's not that common here, but if you go to a lot of Asian countries, and especially Southeast Asia, that's quite normal. You know, any kind of, and it's a very high protein. I think we've been sent bars in previous jobs that have protein bars that have crickets in, and which everyone was kind of like, about. But I think this stuff, I don't think that's going to be the forefront, but I think this stuff will creep in. And I think also it's that thing of, if we don't eat responsibly, that is going to be what the menu is, basically. So it's like, do you want to eat crickets for every meal? So it's like, yeah, sort of like eat responsibly now, or that is probably actually going to be the future of meat.
Lovely. So I guess there's a lot here around sort of educating clients, educating how their process is going to work. So how would you recommend working with a corporate client to rework menus to be as sustainable and healthy and varied as possible? And what sort of timelines would you need to make that happen?
I think depending on where you want to go with it will depend on your timeline, first of all. But definitely the engagement piece is huge. So I think that chefs always like a challenge. We always get challenged. It's not always an operational time frame challenge, but actually we enjoy working with people that have the same mindset. So that engagement piece for me, when you sit down with a customer who has the same sort of end goal as you, a menu, I know, Fern, you'll probably agree, if two chefs write a menu together, it's so much easier than one chef writing a menu together. So the same applies to, you know, the delegate side of things or the organizer side of things, is that engage with the chef, put your ideas to the table, because we might be able to enhance your ideas, and you might be able to tell us that our ideas are not so great and they're not going to fit your market. So it works both ways.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than the echo chamber when it comes to writing menus. And you're like, yeah, it's great, and then you go, and then you get it, and then you're like, oh, it's not. You need a lot of different points of view to make a balanced menu.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. You always see it in music, that level of creativity, that applies to chefs too. I think that's absolutely fair enough. So let's bring this question up. So would you ever be open to the idea of offering a vegetarian or vegan menu at reduced price to incentivize uptake?
I think it's hard for us because we very much have packages, as in, so it kind of is usually within that anyway. So you might have a bit more of a...
I think there's, just jumping in here, I've heard around that cauliflower steak that, you know, everyone goes, oh, well, it's really cheap to cook a cauliflower. But Sam, you were telling me the other week that actually there's a lot more skill that goes into cooking a cauliflower steak than there is a fillet, for example, fillet of beef. So I think maybe, yes, that there could be a look at the price point, but actually the skill and the time and the quantity or quality that goes into that does make a difference. So, but that's just what I've heard from you.
100%. It's not all about the cost of the actual product. It's the time to make that come alive. And to Jenna's point, anyone can take a chicken breast or a beef fillet and roast it off for 20 minutes. Call it 20 minutes. That might be wrong in some areas of the room, but it might take a lot. A cauliflower, for example, if we took that, I see that as 3 component parts now. You've got your main cauliflower, you've got your stem that could be utilised, but you've also got your leaves as well. So, of one cooking process for a piece of meat, we could have 3 for a vegetable. So, just because the product might be cheaper per kilo than the beef or the chicken, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to see the saving in terms of your day delegate rate, as an example.
It's a good insight. I've not really thought about that before, but it's nice to hear it from the chef's point of view from inside the kitchen. So there's a very good question here actually about, do you offer carbon labelling for food? And if so, how do you manage and showcase that alongside allergen labelling?
Sam, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so carbon labelling is on across all of our menus, as well as calorie information and allergen information. For me, it's as important as the calorie information and legal requirements. It's not a legal requirement to show it. I have seen things in the press how there are people that are asking for it to become a legal piece of legislation in the same way that calories and allergens are. For our part of the business, I look at it as, I suppose, a menu is five things that I have to do to get an item on the menu. Is the name, the price, and then we're looking at carbon footprint, calories, and then also the allergens as part of that. So it's part of the top 5. There's nothing else that I can see going on there in the future, but it is high on the agenda, and we do it within all of our venues.
Yeah, within Levy as a business, we are very much told any of our recipes that go live have to be put through a system which gives it a score, like how your house would have a energy score, A, B, C. We have the same with food. So where we try to do, a lot of our packages will have 1 meat element in it, so that would be a slightly more. Then we try to balance it out with the rest to get an overall, very kind of sustainable score. And also it's good for us as chefs. So if we put a menu in and then suddenly it's like F, and then we're like, oh, okay, we need to work on that. It basically gives us the kind of tools to make better choices, basically.
Awesome, thank you very much. Well, we've exhausted the tech, but I realise that not everyone can always see the screen over there. So does anyone over here, maybe, anyone out in the audience want to ask anything? If I throw the microphone in someone's face? Yes.
Hi. This is not a question, it's more like a thank you, because I really appreciate the work that you do. I'm vegan, and for example, when I organize birthday parties for my children, all the menu is always vegan, and the cake, which is also vegan, is always the highlight of it. So it doesn't have to be either sustainable or tasty. I think it can be both. But I'm Mexican and tacos, and I was not born or raised vegan, so it's been a challenge. And when people ask me, oh, but how do you manage? Don't you miss like the tacos or Mexican food? And I'm like, well, I do. I find obviously always really nice alternatives, although you need to think and be creative. But I'm doing this for my children and to leave them, a better world. So if I have to compromise sustainable or tasty, I would do sustainable.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions? Okay, well, thank you ever so much for joining us today. If we could give a round of applause to Sam and Fern for joining us. Thank you ever so much. And there will be a session at 3 o'clock on the main stage talking more around food and procurement, so scope 3 side of things. So please join us for that then. See you later. Thank you.